I thought this is like a rite of passage. This is stepping over the threshold into being an adult. This is a new kind of toy.
Yeah.
It's sort of bye Legos, hello Gibson.
You're listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans Kurt Neumann, a T-Torrance Productions original podcast.
Everybody, it's Kurt Neumann, and today we were staring at the world with Mr. Paul Gilbert, one of the top 10 guitarists, shredders in the world. Spent years playing, the 80s and 90s he spent playing with Mr. Big and Racer X, but he has 15 solo records. He's just an amazing player, can play every song ever written on guitar, I think, and he does amazing online teaching as well. So tune in for my interview with Mr. Paul Gilbert. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today we are staring at the world with Mr. Paul Gilbert, who is known as one of the top 10 amazing, most shredder guitars in the world today. Also one of the fastest, which is something I've never been able to do on guitar myself. So it's an amazing feat. He spent the 80s and 90s working with bands like Mr. Big and Racer X, which kind of puts you in the category of hair band, glam rock, metal, all these things at the time. But from researching you, I think you're just really a well-rounded, all-around guitarist, lover of music. And from what I can tell, you might be someone who can play any song ever written before on the guitar as well. I was amazed by how much you seem to retain of just all the songs out there. And it's amazing. So what we do here, what I'm trying to do with the podcast, is talk about the creative element in everyday life and everyday kind of people. And with someone like you, it's kind of obvious that you live your life being a creative person. But I want to talk about like going back to your earliest days in your childhood and like what your life was like kind of starting out, where you came from and what your parents did and what life was like in the house where you were first coming up.
Well, we had a good record collection. My parents had most of the Beatles records, the Stones, the Who, the Animals. So, I heard the most important lick in the world. Boom, 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 boom. That was going on in the house all the time.
Yeah.
They also had a good collection of classical music. So I heard, Although I wasn't into that. I was about 4, and I had the vocabulary of a 4-year-old, so I didn't know complicated words. And I used to describe classical music as dummy music. But I really liked rock and roll, so I used to do a lot of air guitar. I didn't know how to play, but I would just dance around and pretend I was playing. And all the pop music that was on the radio, the Elton John and the Carpenters, and of course guitar rock like Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. That was just whatever I could get my hands on, and those are the days of vinyl. So I used to go to flea markets a lot because we didn't have big budget for new records all the time, and I remember getting a copy of Machine Head by Deep Purple, and I got it for about, it was either quarter or 50 cents. I can't remember, but I got it home, and half of the album was just caked with dirt, like dried mud, and I washed it off in the sink. Yeah. And played it, and it was a little scratchy, but it played, and so I could learn. But of course, at first, I couldn't even tell what was guitar. My ear was attracted mainly to the singer. I'd sort of pay attention to what was going on with the vocals. And it was much later that I was able to pick out, that's the guitar, that's the bass, that's the drums. That was a more sophisticated way of listening. And in a way, I wish I could still hear with a child's ears where it's just a sound. And it's not all these different pieces, and you're not focusing on that's what the bass is doing. because it's sort of nice to be able to not pay attention to the details and just get the full emotion. So I'm hoping to get back to that someday.
Yeah. Whereabouts was this now in the country? Where were you living?
Oh, about an hour out of Pittsburgh. I grew up in Greensburg, which is a small town, and I grew up on the outskirts of Greensburg, in an old farmhouse. There was not a lot to do, and I had, for the first 2 years I had an acoustic, and that I played, and actually I gave up. I took lessons when I was about 6, and it was sight reading that the teacher tried to show me.
Right.
And I was amazed. Like a couple of years ago, I was reading about Brian Setzer, and he mentioned that he had studied the Mel Bay method, and that was the method that it made me quit.
Rejected.
as a 6-year-old. So I just assumed that everybody had quit Mel Bay, but somehow Brian Setzer like kept going, and it obviously it worked for him because he's great.
Yeah.
But Mel Bay discouraged me. I just didn't want to be a reader. I wanted to be a player.
Yeah.
So I gave up. I started taking drum lessons, and it was the Haskell hard drum method, which is also reading, ta, ti, ti, ta, the traditional grip on a snare pad. And I didn't want to do that either. I really, I was a little kid and I had energy. I wanted to bounce around and rock.
Yeah.
And so I just did a lot of air guitar. I bought more records. And then finally at 9, I thought I'd been procrastinating long enough. So I started playing by ear, and I had no idea how to play. I didn't even know how to tune. So I solved that by only playing on one string for about 2 years.
There was no one in your household who was playing music, like your parents didn't play music or stuff like that, that kind of influenced where, your interest in it in the beginning?
Well, there was music always on. So it was music in the air. But the musician in the family was my Uncle Jimmy, who was and still is a really good guitar player. And I didn't see him very often because he lived in Chicago. But when he would visit, he'd pick up my junky acoustic guitar, and he had really good vibrato and feel. And even though it was the acoustic, he'd still be going. He had this slow, really controlled vibrato, and he was into Mick Ronson and of course Hendrix, and he was always telling me to listen to Hendrix records. He was like, you got to get this record called War Heroes, and he thought I'd like it because I was a little kid, and there was a song on that record called Three Little Bears, which was like it's just sort of funny song about three bears. But also on that same record is a song called Midnight, which has the meanest Hendrix riff. It's like this jam that goes on for 7 minutes, and it's psychedelic, bending all over the place, and that's what caught my ear. Like, man, this is what a tune. It's all instrumental, but killer.
So you didn't know what they were doing per se, like even you talk about your uncle bending the notes and stuff, but somehow when he was doing it, it was striking you as very much like you identified, this is correct. I like this. Somehow you were saying, even though you didn't know anything about it, it was reaching you somehow like that I connect with.
Well, that was the thing. In the 70s, you had the guitar players that were like maybe third generation blues players.
Yeah.
Jimmy Page. I didn't know the people that he had listened to. Later on, I would go back and see a video, like with YouTube now, you can research. So I can pull up Otis Rush and hear, oh, that's where Jimmy Page got it. I Can't Quit You, Babe. Or
right.
You can, and it's the same licks. It's like note for note.
Yeah.
A lot of the Zeppelin stuff came from the blues guys. So maybe Jimmy is more of a second generation blues. But that was his thing. There were the 70s guitar players that had that element and great vibrato, blues phrasing, and then there were the guitar players that had come from more of a classical or even country style. Like you had Chet Atkins,
Right.
who was amazing, but
Yeah.
he wasn't like, going,
Right.
doing the Foxy Lady, kind of vibrato. And you also had a guitar player like Steve Howe, who
Oh, yeah.
came from a classical background.
Yeah. I
But
remember
but
listening
he's
to him
not
a
doing
lot.
the Waylon vibrato. And so for whatever reason, I guess maybe because it was the classical music was dummy music. Like whenever I'd hear the players that came from a classical background, I'd be like, I don't know what it is, but I'm not so interested in that. But the guys that went, wow, 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 and were like screaming,
Yeah.
in a way playing more like a vocalist. That to me, that was like the breakthrough that Hendrix did, was he had a lot of the expressiveness that a singer would have
Oh, yeah.
on his guitar through bending and vibrato. And then and being a fan of singers, that's what I could connect to.
Yeah. I especially when Hendrix does something like at Woodstock when he did the national anthem, or he played. It was almost like an opera he was composing. When you really watch that and break it down, it's just unbelievable like that. But staying with your childhood, I want to hear how the story. I kind of heard it, but I'd like for the listeners to be able to hear it. How you got your first guitar, like your first real electric guitar, when you were, I think, 11 years old for Christmas.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell the story?
I've been playing my acoustic for a couple of years. It was a Stella, and I didn't know it at the time, but the good thing was it was short scale.
Yeah.
So, I'm a tall person. So as a 9-year-old, I was tall for being 9, but I'm still 9. I'm
Yeah, it's
little
hard.
kid. So, it was nice to have a little smaller neck.
Yeah.
And, but I wanted an electric, and, I had seen the Song Remains the Same movie and see Jimmy Page with Les Paul. So I was like, oh man, I just wanted to have distortion too. Cause as well as bending notes, I like the big chunky,
Yeah.
That was that sound I wanted to get as well. And acoustic wouldn't do that. So, I didn't know anything about electric guitars. It was a complete mystery to me. And my uncle Jimmy came to visit around Christmas, and he looked in the local paper, and there was a Gibson Les Paul for sale for $300. And I had saved up like 150 from mowing the lawn and birthday money over the years, and that wasn't enough. It was only half. So my parents said, well, we'll kick in the other 150, but they said that's our whole budget. You're not going to get no G.I. Joes, no Legos, no Stretch Armstrong. Only the guitar. Can you handle that?
It's a lot of money back then, right?
And I had to think about it for a second, because I still really liked Legos and G.I. Joes and Stretch Armstrong, and I was still, I was a kid, I was 11, so I thought, but I kind of, I thought this is like a rite of passage. This is stepping over the threshold into being an adult. This is a new kind of toy.
Yeah.
It's sort of bye Legos, hello Gibson.
Right.
And I didn't even know it was Les Paul. It didn't say Les Paul on the truss rod plate, so I didn't know what it was. But we got it, and I didn't have an amp, so I had a cassette player that had a 1/4-inch jack on it, so I plugged into that, turned the levels all the way up, and the VU meters are going, and it had the most buzzy, horrible distortion, but it was distortion through speakers.
Right.
So, and remember, the only thing that sounded good, if you played a power chord, it kind of was something. So I was thrilled. And it was also around the time I started taking lessons from a teacher who was willing to teach me more by ear and by just getting stuff from records. And he showed me neck diagrams and how to read a chord diagrams that had the dots for your fingers.
Yeah.
So I had a Beatles songbook, and I remember coming in. I thought, this guy's going to think I'm a bonehead, so I better learn a chord. So I played a D chord, but I didn't know about the little X's that show the strings you're not supposed to play.
Right.
So I was just playing everything. And going like, I think I learned that from the book.
Fist in the air, rocka.
Not supposed to play the bottom one, and but within. Well, the thing that happened is, because I had spent 2 years pretty much only playing the low E string, and also I only used one finger. I used my second finger, and I only did upstrokes.
Wow.
A very limited technique. But in 2 years of doing that, man, I had some authority with my second finger.
Yeah, I bet. Jesus.
And my upstrokes were really working, and I really knew my way around that low E string. So as I began to work in the other strings and the other fingers and the other and downstrokes, I really wanted everything to feel as good as the stuff what I had already built. So it was I had high standards from that. It was like, it's got to be as cool as what I got going already, and that turned out to be a real advantage, because I didn't go too quickly. I'd always see the guys that would like sort of prematurely playing fast, and it would just be a mess. And I'd be like, I'm not as fast as that, but it's okay, because I'm getting there's clarity to what I'm doing. It's like I can hear the notes, and that was always, and that ended up being the advantage of the dummy music, was the classical musicians had a real control of their instrument. They had great technique, and I wanted to have some. That was the thing that I took from them. And of course, later on, I started to dig compositionally what Bach and Shostakovich and what the composers were doing.
Yeah, I had the 2 cassette decks myself, but I was a drummer from early on, and I didn't even pick up the guitar till I was almost 20. And so in those early years when I had the 2 cassette decks, I just used them to bounce back and forth, and I did my own version of multi-track recording by just bouncing back and forth between the 2 decks. And I would, put a small little cheap microphone up to do drums or a keyboard or whatever I had at the time to try and create those little cassette decks. Were really great vital tools for us, I think, starting off then. But eventually I read you finally did get a real amp that you were able to use, and you didn't use it just for yourself in the end, but for your whole first early band. Tell them the story about turning it up.
Plug everybody in. The very first band I was in was about 11, and I knew a couple chords, and it was great being a band. Like, because I wasn't the lead singer, but I would sing lead on a couple songs. We did Take the Money and Run. Go on, take the money and run.
Yeah.
Oh. And just being able to sort of bash through a song from beginning to end, that's like a real missing element to a lot of bedroom players. And I got that early on. Just spending time, I had to lock in with the drummer and learn those basic skills. But yeah, I had a 6-watt Fender Vibro champ, which is a nice amp, but pretty small. And I think I was the only one that had an amp. So we plugged the bass and the other guitar player and 2 vocal mics. And of course, whatever the loudest thing is drowns out everything else. It doesn't really work. If you ever try it, it's horrible.
Yeah.
But it was all we had. So that's what we did. And I still those. And it was always this searching for the local musicians. You'd go to the music store, and there'd be a little bulletin board. And I remember there was an ad, lead guitar player wanted, must be 13. And I'm like, man, I'm 12. But like, are they going to card me? So I call them up, and they said, oh, you're 13? They're like, yeah, I'm 13. My birth didn't change yet.
Basically, I'm 13.
And I went down to do audition, and I got in the band, and then the older guys always had record collections. So they would, like, that band turned me on to Thin Lizzy, so I started playing.
Right.
And that's a great, that's real syncopated line to learn, just rhythmically. So, regardless of the notes, getting those rhythms together and be able to lock them in with the drummer. And then, 13 was sort of, I couldn't find a band. When I was 14, I got my first pretty good band with like a loud drummer, had a Vista Light kit. And we used to play like a lot of UFO and AC/DC and Alice Cooper. I remember there was the 70s heavy metal shuffle was like my favorite groove. This is School's Out. 1, 2, 3. And the drum fill. And just every song that had that groove we would do. There's a song by Triumph called American Girls. And so all our songs, boop, boop, da, boop, but then I saw Saxon. They had 1, 2, 3. that was but that got some swing into my playing.
Yeah.
Even though it's kind of third generation blues, it's still, there was a swing. It's still there's an underlying triplet going. What did I need and the lock. Or Hey Baby, it's Ted Nugent. So that was that's another thing that I find it's kind of post Metallica. The swing was lost. Other good things came in. There's some awesome stuff about Metallica, but I feel fortunate to be still connected to vibrato and shuffles and things that came from the blues.
Yeah, and it also, there's a theory I talk to people about when it comes to almost anything in life, but certainly when it comes to musical instruments. I feel like when people were fortunate enough to start around that 5-6 years old to 15, like your brain somehow takes everything and just leaps and bounds of information are coming in and staying in there. And it's much easier to really grasp an instrument or anything at those ages. I find, like when I watch you play right now, I see that you don't look at the neck or anything like that. You just kind of, there's a sense about it. And I always feel like that got locked in at those ages of just sitting in the room, going through the routine of playing and playing to the point that you could hear something and you could see it somewhere on the neck almost without like having to search real hard to find it. Now, I mean, what do you think about my theory? Do you think that's correct, or do you think that's just nuts?
I'm going to test it today, because today I'm going to go upright bass shopping.
Wow, that's nice. Yeah, that's cool.
But of course, I see being a musician as sort of, the instrument matters, but overall it's just connection to pitch and time and all the elements of expression, being able to contrast long and short and loud and soft and having some harmonic sensibility. But
and retention, I think, too, though. Like when I'm watching you play and stuff, you're able to recall all these parts just there. It's just in your brain. And I'm not sure everybody's brain works the same way where they can just retain information like that, too. That's really kind of a gift that you have for...
Well, I'm choosing battles I can win. If there's for every song that I play, I'm not choosing all the ones that I forgot.
Oh, yeah, because I have like 200 songs and I can't remember all of them. I wish I could, but I literally can't. I can't remember. And nor did my brain work in a way where I could just grab any song off the radio and remember how to play it like yours can. And I just feel like, I wonder if you were born with that in your brain, or if that's something you developed when you were young or not.
I think it has to do with having a structure that all this stuff fits into. Because I know if I go to the grocery store and I have to remember more than 3 things to buy,
me too.
I got to write it down.
Yeah, me too.
But when it comes to remembering Beatles chords, and maybe what it might be is I'm not really remembering them. It's more, I just know how it goes, and then that's the language.
But I think science even would back this up, that there's different levels of your brain that actually work better. And so when they talk about people getting mental problems as they get older, to where they're forgetting everything or not, I think some of that music always stays there because it's working on that different part of the brain. At least I've heard scientists kind of talk about it on TV. I'm not an authority.
And also a song is like a big concept. So in a way, you're not really focusing so much on the individual pieces. It's this whole story. So, once you get the story rolling, then you just follow the story. So, the song that comes to mind is "You Won't See Me" by the Beatles. And when I call you up, let's engage. And that concept is the same. It's the 1 chord, the 2 with like a secondary dominant, and then 4. And that's the same as it's a different key, but the same as it's 1 years ago today.
Yeah.
For the band to play. So, and then there's another I can't remember the other ones, but there's a bunch of songs that do that. So it's sort of this story.
It is, and
And
it seems like it's not like a conscious thought. It's more of an unconscious thought when you're playing music. At least when I feel like music is coming off at the best for me playing it, I'm not at all thinking about what am I doing or where am I going next or anything like that. It's more of just a unconscious thing that's happening, especially as a group too, right? Like when you have several players, they're all kind of working at this energy together that comes together, but you're not so much in the forefront of your mind thinking about it. It's more like just letting it happen.
well, the nice contrast that could demonstrate a little bit about the brain. The hardest session I ever had to do in my life was I played on my friend Jeff Martin's solo album, and Jeff is a great singer and a great drummer, and he was a singer of Racer X and played drums with all kinds of legendary people, and he did a solo album and he wrote the guitar parts, and he called me up and he said I don't know how to play guitar, so he said this is going to be easy for you because I can barely play. And everything I did is so simple because I just, I'm not a guitar player. So, I hardly even move my hand at all. But he said, can you replay the parts so it's like has a professional touch to it? And I just went, sure. So he came over, and it was so difficult for me because he had kind of invented his own language.
Right.
So it wasn't using the common, when I play the Beatles songs, like an A chord. And that A chord I've used in 300 of those other songs.
Yeah.
And the B7 is in 200 other songs. So it's this common language. But with Jeff, it was like, it's simple, but it's Swedish. It's a different language. And I was like a total beginner. Like, man, Jeff, this is hard, really hard. But I made my way through it. But that was one of the most difficult things I ever had to do.
BoDeans was like that too. We weren't good at what we did at all on our instruments. We weren't, by any sense. I had only been playing guitar for a few years when we went to record our first record and stuff, but it was deceptively simple because we did that same thing. We kind of came up with our own version of it too, and a lot of people we would bring in would struggle with it too, and they would get very frustrated saying, this stuff is so simple. And I was just like, yeah, but I understand more when you say it, that it's in its own language. Sometimes that can make it very unique to try to play along with that.
Would be like having to cover a song by the Shags.
Yeah.
That would be like harder than any progressive rock song, like, because it's almost nonsensical. And it was, I don't know if, you can Google the Shags.
Yeah.
There's these three girls that were just given instruments by their dad, and he threw them in the studio and said, make an album. And they were not musicians, but they came up with something.
Yeah.
And it was all their own. They like invented their own language on the spot. And new languages are rough.
They are. When I look at a guitar neck and I play because I think I spent so many years playing drums before guitar, I still look at the guitar neck and I almost play more in what I would call patterns rather than just notes. But I'm sensing that you don't really ever see it that way when you're playing. Like you're just kind of like, you can feel where those notes are more, and you don't have to think about playing in this pattern, like I'm in this key, therefore I play this pattern. For you, I think it's probably just more esoteric. Like,
I think, well, no, definitely it helps to have visual shapes to work in, and with guitar, a lot of it has to do with like what's coming before it, what's coming next, and how to make those transitions sound good and feel good. So, it's just not just one note all by itself in space. It's connected to something else. You have to get there.
Do you think you see notes on the neck more than like I see patterns? You think you see notes? Like if I'm playing something, often I couldn't tell you what notes I'm playing. I just know that I'm playing within a pattern.
Yeah. Well, it's a combination of all that stuff. And the goal is you want to be able to play what you hear in your head.
Yeah.
If you don't hear anything in your head, you either stop or you just let your hand do its thing. But the thing that I've been doing, like on the the TWAS record and like the last three records, is really trying to to take on the role that a singer would have, but on the guitar. Because I wanted to be a singer for the longest time. I love singers, and what they do, but my voice has real limitations in terms of range and tone and pitch accuracy.
Sure.
So I got to tour with Joe Satriani years ago, and watching how he stepped into the role of a singer on guitar, and the audience loved it. It was, it sounded great, and I started to take that more and more seriously. And it's a different way of playing because, I was a real scaly player for a long time, and would take those shapes and rip through them in different ways, and that, almost like Van Halen was an inspiration for that. Yngwie, Alan Holdsworth, the faster players. Yeah. But to be able to play a vocal, and the first one that I really, just tried hard to get was Mercedes-Benz, the Janis Joplin, where she goes, "Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz?" And I started to use slide, so I was going like 1, 2, 3. And that was really different than how I played, but in a way that's what I should have gone for at the beginning, because I always, the vocalist inside me always wanted to do that. And
somebody had suggested that to me early on too, when I was approaching lead parts and I didn't know what to play. They would be like, "Well, just stick with the melody, stick with what the melody of the song is, or the vocal melody." So I tried to always remember to kind of start at that place, because I was never the fast scale type player at all. So, and I was always more of the singer-songwriter, so I would approach it that way. And I think that's a great place to be in, though, when you can be expressive with the melody of the song like that, and you can kind of augment it, as you're saying.
Yeah, if I need some whittly, that's there.
Yeah.
And I like the balance of both. It's nice. Any kind of contrast in music tends to kind of wake up the listener and create emotion and drama. So, if you're playing something fast, then play something slow, and then the two things complement each other and create drama. And I think that's the danger of what sort of happened in a certain era at music schools, where everybody's doing scales.
Yeah.
Because in general, if you sit down and play a scale up and down, a lot of the elements of expression start to become the same. You're playing with the same tone, the same texture, the volume, the dynamics are the same, the length of time is the same. And if you're going, it's all eighth notes or something, and that's the thing. And it's easy to write that stuff down. So anybody who's a reader is going to be, tends to be attracted to that because you can read it.
Right.
Where, if you try to transcribe a B.B. King solo, it's like, this is, it's hard to get it on paper because it's all this cool stuff that, if you did notate it, it would be tiresome.
Like one hanging note for about 16 bars.
And then to have to read it, it's just the wrong. The wrong format to note. I mean, the way to notate that is to spend time with that language, and develop your instincts and be able to hear it and go, well, of course there's a slide there, and of course there's a bend, and you sort of get it by listening rather than get it by reading.
I read something interesting though, and this ties into, I think, what you're talking about, is that when you're writing your songs, you said a lot of times you start with a lyric in your head singing rather than approaching the song on the guitar. Like, I'll write a song sometimes I'll find something on the guitar or some chord progression that I like, and then I'll add words to that. But you're saying almost the exact opposite, is like you start singing some melody in your head and it triggers something for you to play on the guitar to write a song that way.
Well, it almost always seems to work. It's if you build. So the metaphor I think of is like, if you're making a suit for somebody, you want to start with the person and how what shape they are, how tall they are, and then you measure the suit to fit, rather than the other way around. You don't build the suit and then go, well, where's a person that's going to squeeze into this thing? and so, I mean, that really the rock the rock and roll that I grew up with, a band like Led Zeppelin, which was pretty riff based.
Yeah.
You had to have a very flexible singer to be able to handle. Okay, well, here's this finished song. Good luck. Find some room in there to squeeze in. And if you get somebody who's such an amazing singer like Robert Plant, Steven Tyler, or these athletic
screamers,
incredible ranges, it can work. But at the same time, if you just start with the melody and lyrics, it's a traditional way to write. I mean, that's what traditional songwriting is melody and lyrics, and then the arrangement is like, well, how do we orchestrate it? What's the chords behind it? And it's always amazing because when you only have the melody and the lyrics, it's very skeletal. It's very bare bones, and you almost hard to have faith in it. Like, that's it. It just seems so lonely.
Yeah.
And then there's that process as you start to accompany it, and it almost immediately starts to like breathe life into it, and it's exciting. And then you put the rhythm section in, it's like, wow, this is really something. And it only gets better. Where I found if I go the other way and I've got some cool riff, and then you squeeze the vocal and it doesn't quite fit, and it's kind of like disappointment as it goes.
Sometimes I will be driving around and I'll start singing some silly song idea in my head. I'll grab my phone and turn on the voice recorder and sing it. I have a lot of recordings of me in the car driving somewhere where I record an idea like that as well. And
it's a little soundproof booth. You can sing, and you don't have to worry about anybody hearing you.
But I've always put songs kind of together off licks first. I'll have to try it the other way and see how, because it must be refreshing to have it keep getting better like that as you go and keep growing and getting more developed as you go along.
Well, the other thing I'll do is I'll strip a song down to where it is only melody and kind of listen to it with and try to forget what the harmony was, just to see like what would happen. For example, if you take I Want to Hold Your Hand, and just listen to the melody without any of the chords, like 1 and 2. That's it. I mean, if you can sort of forget about, or even if you play it over a drone, like, let's see. That's an odd note. No, it's a major seventh.
Yeah.
And so if that's sort of where you start, and then they had to find there's something and that chord breathes life into it. But it's interesting to do that to a bunch of songs that have strong melodies, and realize like there's some notes in there that if you're just played it over only a single chord, they would really be unusual, sort of jarring notes, and so that makes it okay. So as you compose your own melody, you might even look for those. You might go like, well, my melody is like too normal. There's nothing jarring in there.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna have those cool little surprises.
Yeah.
Because you can take any jarring note and add a chord that will introduce it in a nice way. I mean, one of the classics is "I Get Around" by the Beach Boys, where they're going with it, is it fifth, and the melody is. It's really dissonant, but because of the chord, that secondary dominant or the sixth chord, I get around, and then it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But without,
I hear you talking about those notes and stuff, and I was very unschooled in music, so I would just sing and play whatever. If a note sounded interesting or a melody sounded interesting, I would just play it. And it wasn't until years later that some of the people I would tour with who were schooled in music would be playing like, well, what are you playing there? What are you singing? They're like, oh, you're doing this seventh over the ninth or something. And in there they'd be like, well, that's really interesting. But to me, I didn't know it was interesting. It's just something that I was singing, in the moment. And it's not until years later and you go back and look at those songs, you're just like, that's weird. How did I come up with that? Or where did that come from? But it was just natural at the time,
Well, it's almost embarrassing to use that terminology because I don't want to sound snooty. and like, oh, it's the secondary dominance. It's
No, I don't think that's snooty at all. I think it's great that you have that knowledge. I think everybody should be able, the more knowledge you have, I think the better off you are. Like you talk about speaking different languages with people and all of our different things we do. And it's nice to have that to fall back on, to understand what you're doing. It's just when I was young, starting into it, I had no idea. It was just like, whatever, this sounds all right, let's do this. And it's what makes music interesting. I read one of the things you said about you were really into 70s AM radio, and I was too. I used to ride my bike around with a little radio listening to it, and I sometimes wonder if all those influences just came in from there, whether we knew it or not, and affected the music we do.
They definitely do. That's where it comes from. But when I went to school, I went to a school for a year, and it was just basically a lot of it was labeling stuff that I already had in my ears, and but it also produced a clarity, like, oh, that's a slash chord, and it's got this triad on top, and then bass note's different, and suddenly it took a little bit of the mystery out of it. And at the time I was really learning like the sort of slightly more complicated pop music, like Todd Rundgren stuff,
right?
The Pet Sounds era, Beach Boys, that kind of thing. And from having only played by ear, I could only sort of make just one. I mean, sometimes I would get one right, but a lot of times I couldn't hear. A lot of times it's the production, like on a Beatles album. The loudest thing is the vocal and the tambourine,
right?
And the whatever's playing the sophisticated chord in the background, it'd be like, what? I couldn't quite make it out, and so having spending a year at school is like, oh, then I knew on paper what it was, and I could, it turned it from an essay question into multiple choice. It's like, okay, it's one of these three. and then you could try it and go, okay, this one sounds the most like it. And, it's amazing because those guys weren't trained with that terminology. I mean, they were trained by learning Everly Brothers songs,
Yeah.
But they'd have a song like "All I've Got to Do," which has that. What is it? It's like an augmented with a couple extra crazy notes on top. Whenever and I could never have figured that thing out. That I had to get out of the book.
I still couldn't.
But then you listen to it enough, and it starts to get in your ear. But that you don't come across that chord that often.
No, and I actually did a version of Come Together once where it wasn't until I had done a demo of it and brought it to the band and everything where someone pointed out to me that I had one of the chords totally wrong. And I was just like, oh, really? I was just so like, oh my God, how did I do that? But I didn't. I had figured out my own way to play it. And the guy was like, no, I like this better. Let's just, do it this way. And it was interesting. But I am that way too. To try to find those chords, it's just like, wow, it's incredible. But you started teaching online because you have this ability, and you have, you also were at the Guitar Institute of Technology, and you taught there, correct? Mm-hmm. And so now you brought it online to the Artist Work series that you do as well. And I heard you say something, so tell me if this is true or not, but were you doing 3 videos a day for 5 years straight for your online stuff?
I do about an average of 5 a day, so it's over 1,000 a year.
That's insane.
And it's I couldn't do that if I didn't enjoy it. It's really fun.
Yeah.
But I just realized I've got to go. I've got my next interview coming up, so I'm going to wave this in your face.
Let's talk about TWAS. Yeah, it's coming out November 26th.
I've got about 30 seconds to talk about it. So,
November 22nd, you got a Christmas record coming out.
I only played red, green, and white guitars.
Beautiful. And your Ibanez model guitar as well, I suppose, right?
Yeah. And it's all live in the studio. I got a jazz guitar player to back me up, and a jazz keyboard player because they know the chords.
Yeah.
And I got a blues rhythm section, so it's got some earthiness to it. And I'm doing my thing on top.
I'm sorry to take up all your time, but look for the Christmas record from Mr. Paul Gilbert. TWAS, November 26th, coming out. And I bet you it sounds amazingly beautiful. You're an amazing guitarist, musician. Thank you for spending some time with us here. I really appreciate it.
Right. Thanks for talking to me. Thank you so much.
You take care.
Have a good one.
So that was the interview with Mr. Paul Gilbert. I hope you guys liked it. I'm Kurt Neumann. This is the Staring at the World podcast. I want you to subscribe, rate, review, love the podcast, download it wherever you can. I appreciate any support you can give us. Otherwise, I'm just a lonely guy in a room talking to myself. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans Kurt Neumann, a podcast about creative innovation. Please be sure to download, subscribe, rate, and review, and keep listening wherever you get your podcasts.